Ethan Parker was 28 when he packed his life into 4 cardboard boxes and left Seattle behind. The city had drained him. Its noise, its pace, and the loneliness that came even when you were surrounded by people. After a tough breakup and losing motivation for his freelance design work, he rented a small house in a quiet Portland suburb, hoping peace would help him find direction again. He wasn't running away. At least that's what he told himself. He was just starting over. His new neighborhood was calm and leafy, the kind where mornings smelled like dew and evenings echoed with crickets. He didn't know anyone, and for the first few days he liked it that way. No distractions, no pressure, but isolation has a way of feeling heavy when the sun goes down. And by the end of the first week, the silence started to ache. One late afternoon, while carrying groceries from his car, Ethan noticed someone next door. A woman, maybe in her mid-50s, was trimming rose bushes along her white picket fence. She moved with slow precision, her silver hair tied loosely, sunlight catching the edges of it. Her hands looked practiced, gentle but steady. She wore a soft smile, humming a tune he couldn't quite place. When their eyes met, she smiled wider. "New around here?" she asked, her voice calm and warm. "Yeah," Ethan replied, adjusting the grocery bag on his arm. "Just moved in a few days ago." "I thought so," she said with a knowing nod. "I'm Margaret. Most people just call me Maggie." "Welcome to Maple Street," Ethan smiled politely. "Thank you. I'm Ethan." "Well, Ethan," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "If you ever need a cup of sugar or company, my door's always open." He chuckled softly. "That's good to know. I might take you up on that sugar offer." "Good," she said, returning to her roses. Every good start deserves something sweet. Later that evening, as Ethan unpacked more boxes, he caught himself thinking about her. How her tone carried warmth without effort. There was something grounding about it. Maybe it was just nice to feel noticed, even briefly. He brushed off the thought, convincing himself it was nothing more than neighborly kindness. Days passed quietly. Ethan worked from home, kept to himself, and took evening walks through the neighborhood. Every now and then, he'd see Maggie tending her flowers or reading on her porch with a cup of tea. She always waved and he always waved back. Their small exchanges became part of his routine, a quiet comfort he didn't realize he needed. One Thursday afternoon, Maggie appeared at his door holding a small basket. "I figured you might not have had time to bake yet," she said cheerfully, handing it to him. Inside were cookies, still warm, the smell of chocolate filling the doorway. Ethan blinked, a little surprised. "You didn't have to do this." "Oh, I know," she replied, smiling softly. "That's what makes it nice." Her kindness caught him off guard. He invited her in for coffee, and they talked for almost an hour, about his work, her garden, and the neighborhood. She mentioned her husband had passed away 5 years ago, and though she said it lightly, Ethan noticed the brief shadow in her eyes. He didn't ask more, sensing she'd already said enough. After she left, he felt something unusual. He wasn't sure if it was gratitude or curiosity, maybe both. He had met many people, but there was something about Maggie that felt different. She carried peace like it was something she'd earned the hard way. A week later, a storm rolled through the neighborhood, knocking out the power. Ethan was sitting in the dark when he heard a knock on his door. Opening it, he found Maggie holding 2 lit candles. "I thought you might need some light," she said. He smiled. "You always come prepared, don't you?" "I try," she said with a laugh, stepping inside. They sat in the living room, surrounded by soft candlelight. Rain tapped against the windows, and the flicker of the flames made the room feel almost magical. "Does it ever get boring here?" Ethan asked after a while. "Only if you stop looking for beauty," she replied simply. "Even the quiet can be full of stories if you pay attention." Her words stayed with him. They talked for hours, about art, old movies, music. Maggie told him about her travels when she was younger, and Ethan listened like a kid hearing stories for the first time. She spoke with such ease and depth that it reminded him of how shallow most of his recent conversations had been. When the storm finally eased and she got up to leave, Ethan walked her to the door. "Thanks for the light," he said. Maggie looked at him and smiled gently. Anytime. We all need a little light once in a while. After she left, the silence in the house felt different. Not heavy anymore, but thoughtful. Ethan stood for a long time by the window, watching the rain fall. He realized how much that small interaction had affected him. It wasn't attraction, at least not in the usual sense. It was something quieter, something deeper. She made him feel grounded, seen, and strangely understood. And that was something he hadn't felt in years. The next morning, he saw her again, standing by her roses, talking to them softly like old friends. He smiled to himself, poured his coffee, and decided to walk over. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied, glancing up. "You survived the storm, I see." "Thanks to your candles," he said, handing her a cup of coffee he'd brought for her. She accepted it, pleasantly surprised. "Well, look at that," she said. "You're already becoming a good neighbor." "I had a good example," Ethan replied, meaning every word. She laughed quietly. "You're too kind." But beneath her laugh, Ethan noticed something in her eyes, something reflective, as if she saw through him, through all the walls he'd built around himself. It was both unsettling and comforting at the same time. From that morning on, their interactions became routine. She'd share small lessons about gardening or life, and he'd help her carry heavy bags or fix her mailbox. They laughed easily, talked about ordinary things, and every so often, shared small silences that felt safe rather than awkward. One afternoon, as Ethan walked back home after helping her trim the hedges, he realized how much lighter he felt. Maggie didn't demand anything from him. She didn't try to change him. She just was. And somehow, that was enough to make him want to change himself. That night, while working on a design project, Ethan found himself sketching roses without realizing it. Soft, flowing lines that reminded him of her garden, and when he looked at the drawing, he smiled. It wasn't perfect, but it felt alive. That's when he understood what Maggie had brought into his life. Light, warmth, and the quiet reminder that even after everything, beauty could still exist in the ordinary. He didn't know it yet, but that was just the beginning. Because soon, the lessons she would teach him wouldn't just be about gardens or peace. They would be about life itself. Weeks passed, and Ethan's quiet life began to feel full again. Work no longer felt like a burden, mornings didn't drag, and evenings were something to look forward to. Every day held a small moment with Maggie, sometimes just a wave, sometimes a conversation over tea. She had this rare way of making even silence feel like connection, but the more time he spent with her, the more he wondered about her past. She often spoke in pieces, as if her stories were windows she opened only halfway. One late morning, Maggie invited him over to help her clean her old shed. The air smelled of rain and lavender as Ethan followed her through the garden. Vines crawled along the fence, and roses bloomed in perfect color harmony. She stopped near the back, pointing to a locked wooden door half hidden by ivy. "I haven't opened this in years," she said softly. "It's where my husband used to spend most of his time." Ethan glanced at her, catching the flicker of emotion in her eyes. "You sure you want to go in?" "Yes," she said after a moment. "It's time." He helped her remove the old lock. The door creaked open, revealing a small greenhouse, overgrown but still beautiful. Dust floated in the air like tiny ghosts, and sunlight streamed through the cracked glass roof. Inside were rows of pots, dried vines, and a single wooden chair covered in dust. Maggie stepped in slowly, running her fingers along the empty plant beds. "He loved this place," she whispered. "Said it was where life never stopped growing, even when people did." Ethan watched her quietly. There was a heaviness in her voice that words couldn't fix. After a moment, she smiled faintly. "I think we should bring it back." And so they did. Day by day, they cleaned, replanted, and repaired. The greenhouse came alive again, filled with color and scent. Maggie guided him patiently, teaching him how to tend to roots, when to water, and how to feel the soil between his fingers to know its story. As the days passed, their bond grew deeper, not romantic but profoundly human. She became like family, though neither ever said it. He would share bits of his life, too. His failed relationship, his burnout, his fear of not being enough. Maggie never judged him. She only listened, offering small bits of wisdom that stayed longer than advice ever could. One afternoon, as they worked side by side, Maggie said, "You remind me of someone. Your husband?" Ethan asked gently. She smiled. "No, my son." Ethan paused. "You have a son?" Her hand stilled. "Had," she corrected quietly. "He passed away many years ago. Car accident. He was 24. Ethan felt his chest tighten. "I'm sorry, Maggie." "It's all right," she said, though her voice trembled. "You never really stopped missing them. You just learned to carry them differently." The air felt heavy for a moment, but she kept working, humming softly again. Ethan didn't push for more. He didn't need to. The pain in her eyes told the story. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Maggie's loss, the quiet strength she carried every day. He thought about how she still smiled, still cared, still gave light to others even after so much darkness. It humbled him. It made his own struggles feel small, yet meaningful. The next morning, he brought over breakfast, freshly baked bread, jam, and coffee. Maggie looked surprised but touched. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I know," Ethan replied softly. "That's what makes it nice." She smiled, recognizing her own words. As spring turned to summer, the garden thrived. The greenhouse bloomed again, and so did Ethan's spirit. He started painting in his free time, something he hadn't done in years. Many of his paintings were inspired by Maggie's garden, the colors, the peace, the quiet power of rebirth. He even started sharing them online, and people loved them. Slowly, his confidence returned. One evening, as they watched the sunset from her porch, Maggie said, "You've changed." "Ethan, you look lighter." "Maybe I just started paying attention," he said with a grin. She chuckled. That's where it all begins. But the lightness didn't last forever. One morning, Ethan knocked on her door and got no answer. He tried calling her name, but silence filled the air. Concerned, he checked around the back and found her sitting in her garden chair, her hands folded, her breathing shallow. He rushed over, kneeling beside her. "Maggie, are you okay?" She opened her eyes slowly and smiled faintly. "I'm all right," she whispered. "Just tired." He called for help, and she was taken to the hospital. The doctor told him she had a heart condition, one she'd been managing quietly for years. Ethan stayed by her side, visiting every day. She was weak, but her spirit remained steady. One afternoon, she asked him to bring her a small box from her shelf. Inside was an old photograph of her husband, and a young man who looked a lot like Ethan. "That's my son," she said softly. His name was Daniel. Ethan stared at the photo. "He really does look like me." "That's why I felt connected to you," she admitted. "When you moved next door, I didn't just see a neighbor. I saw a second chance. To care again, to give without fear." Ethan's throat tightened. "You gave me a second chance too," he said quietly. She smiled. "Then we helped each other, didn't we?" That was their last long conversation. Maggie passed away peacefully 2 weeks later, surrounded by flowers and light. She left him her garden, her books, and a note that read, "Keep growing things. The world needs more life, not less." Ethan spent days in silence after the funeral, sitting in the garden they'd built together. At first, it felt empty without her voice, her laughter, her calm presence. But slowly, the garden began to speak for her. The roses bloomed brighter, the wind whispered through the leaves, and every corner felt touched by her memory. He reopened the greenhouse and decided to make it a community space, a place where people could come to learn, plant, and find peace. He called it Maggie's Garden. Word spread quickly, and soon neighbors, children, and families began visiting. The once quiet house became a place of connection again. On the opening day, Ethan placed her favorite chair inside the greenhouse, right beside a small plaque that read, "For the woman who taught me how to grow again." As the sun poured through the glass and the scent of roses filled the air, Ethan smiled. He felt her presence, soft, warm, eternal. She had changed him, not through grand gestures, but through the simple act of kindness and the courage to care. And in that moment, Ethan realized something Maggie had tried to teach him all along, that love doesn't always come in romantic forms. Sometimes it's in the way someone shows up, listens, and reminds you that life can begin again, even after you've lost everything. He took a deep breath, feeling the peace she'd left behind. The garden was alive, and so was he. Months passed after Maggie's passing, and though Ethan tried to move on, her absence still lingered like a soft echo. The house next door looked the same. The roses still bloomed, the wind still carried the scent of lavender, but it felt different without her gentle voice calling his name across the fence. Some mornings, he still caught himself glancing toward her porch, half expecting her to wave or offer a cup of tea. But she was gone, and now the silence carried both pain and peace. Yet her garden didn't let him fall apart. Maggie had built something too beautiful to be forgotten. Every day, people came to visit Maggie's garden. Neighbors, children, and strangers who had heard about the woman who turned a broken greenhouse into a place of life. Ethan watched them plant flowers, laugh, and share stories. Slowly, the garden became more than just a tribute. It became a heartbeat for the community. One afternoon, a young woman arrived carrying a basket of tools. She was in her early 30s, with auburn hair and a calm, kind face. "Hi," she said. "You must be Ethan. I'm Claire. I heard about what you're doing here, and I'd love to help." Ethan smiled. "We can always use another pair of hands." From that day on, Claire became part of the garden's rhythm. She worked quietly but with passion, just like Maggie once did. She was an artist who designed floral landscapes for community spaces. Over time, she started helping Ethan improve the garden, adding small wooden benches, repainting the greenhouse door, and sketching plans for an open flower exhibit. Ethan found her company refreshing. She didn't fill the silence with needless words. She simply understood it. One day, while they were replanting lilies, she said, "It's amazing how much love this place holds." "You can feel it," he nodded. "It's all her. Maggie built this with her heart." Claire looked at him thoughtfully. "Maybe, but you kept it alive." "That matters too." Her words stayed with him. For the first time since Maggie's passing, Ethan realized he wasn't just preserving her memory. He was continuing her purpose. That night, he opened his sketchbook and began drawing new designs for the garden, adding lights, paths, and small corners where people could sit and think. The next morning, he shared the ideas with Claire, and she smiled. "Let's make it happen." Together, they worked tirelessly through the summer. The garden grew more beautiful than ever. Sunflowers standing tall, lavender dancing in the wind, and a new fountain built in the center. Children played around it, couples sat beneath the trees, and people began leaving handwritten notes of gratitude on a wooden board near the entrance. Many of them spoke of how the garden gave them peace when they needed it most. Ethan read every note. One evening, as the sun set over the glowing petals, he said softly to himself, "You'd be proud, Maggie." But even as joy surrounded him, Ethan couldn't ignore the growing feeling inside. He was drawn to Claire in ways that scared him. There was something about her. Her kindness, her quiet laughter, the way she reminded him to take breaks when he got too lost in his work. She wasn't like anyone he'd met before, but part of him hesitated, unsure if it was right to let someone new into a space that still belonged to Maggie's memory. One evening, while they sat on the porch drinking lemonade, Claire said gently, "You don't talk much about yourself." Ethan smiled faintly. "There's not much to tell." "I don't believe that," she said. "People don't build something this meaningful without a story." He sighed. "I guess I lost my way for a while. I used to be an artist, but I stopped painting after my breakup. Then Maggie came along and reminded me that broken things can still grow." Claire's eyes softened. "She must have been special." "She was," he said quietly. "Not in a romantic way, but she saved me." Claire nodded. "Sounds like she left you the strength to save yourself." Those words hit him deeply. That night, he took out his old paints again. Under the glow of his porch light, he painted Maggie's greenhouse, alive with color, surrounded by people smiling, with the sky painted in shades of gold. It felt like closure, not loss. A few weeks later, the garden held its first Maggie's Day, a small event to celebrate her memory. Ethan and Claire organized everything: music, stories, and an art corner for kids. People came from all over town. The atmosphere was full of warmth, laughter, and gentle emotion. At one point, Ethan gave a short speech. He stood in front of the crowd, his voice steady but full of feeling. "Maggie taught me that life doesn't stop after loss. It changes. She showed me how to care, how to listen, and how to begin again. This garden isn't just for her. It's for everyone who's ever lost something and found hope again." When he finished, the crowd clapped softly, some with tears in their eyes. Claire walked over and whispered, "She'd be proud of you." Ethan smiled, his eyes glistening. "I hope so." As the evening faded, soft music played, and people lit candles around the fountain. The warm light reflected on the water, and for a moment, it felt as if Maggie was right there among them. Ethan closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Over time, the bond between Ethan and Claire deepened. They spent evenings talking about dreams, regrets, and the small miracles of life. One night, after everyone had left the garden, Claire said, "You know, Maggie may have started this place, but you gave it its heart." Ethan looked at her, realizing how true that was. "Maybe," he said, smiling softly. "But you helped me see it." Claire blushed slightly, looking away. "Then maybe she sent me to remind you." They both laughed, but a comfortable silence followed. There was something in her tone, something gentle yet full of meaning. Ethan didn't rush it. He didn't need to. For the first time in a long while, he felt that life was unfolding exactly as it should. As autumn came, the leaves began to fall, painting the garden in gold and amber. Ethan stood by the greenhouse one afternoon, watching the wind carry the leaves through the air. Claire joined him, handing him a warm cup of coffee. "You think she'd like what we've done?" she asked. "I think she'd love it," he said, smiling, "because it's still growing." Claire nodded, then said quietly, "That's what life does, doesn't it? It keeps growing, even after goodbye." He looked at her, the late sunlight glinting off her hair, and felt something shift inside him. The grief that once weighed him down now felt lighter, almost peaceful. Maggie hadn't left him with emptiness. She'd left him with direction. That night, as he walked through the garden under the stars, Ethan thought about how life had changed. He had lost someone precious, but through that loss, he had found purpose, peace, and maybe the beginning of a new kind of love. He touched one of the roses they had planted together and smiled. The petals were soft, the color deep and full of life. Maggie's words echoed in his mind. "Keep growing things. The world needs more life, not less." And he finally understood. She wasn't just talking about flowers. Winter came quietly that year, blanketing the small town in soft snow. The once bright garden now rested under layers of white, its flowers asleep but not forgotten. Ethan stood by the window of his home, looking out at the stillness, remembering how Maggie used to tell him, "Even in winter, the roots are working. Life doesn't stop, it just hides for a while." Her words echoed in his heart like a promise. He missed her presence, but the ache no longer hurt. It felt like a gentle reminder of what she had taught him. Claire still came by every few days. Together they checked on the greenhouse, made sure the heater was working, and talked about plans for spring. Their friendship had grown quietly, steadily, like the roots beneath the frost. There was warmth between them, unspoken but deep. Ethan felt it every time she smiled at him or left her gloves on the bench, knowing she'd return for them. One evening, as snow fell outside, Ethan found an old wooden box in his attic. Inside were sketches, his unfinished paintings, old photographs, and one small envelope with Maggie's handwriting on it. His hands trembled as he opened it. The letter was short but filled with her steady kindness. "Ethan, if you're reading this, I probably didn't get to say goodbye the way I wanted. But I want you to remember something. Life isn't about holding on. It's about passing things forward. Promise me you'll keep painting, and don't close your heart to new people. You're meant to give light, not hide it." Tears filled his eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude. Maggie had known him better than he realized. He looked around his quiet home, at the sketches on the wall, the soft glow of the lamp, and thought of how much had changed. She had entered his life when he was broken and left him with the tools to heal. The next day, Ethan went to the garden early. The air was cold, his breath forming clouds in front of him. He cleared snow from the path, then started painting a new sign for the entrance. It read, "The Garden of New Beginnings." As he worked, Claire arrived, carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. "You're out here early," she said, smiling. "Couldn't sleep," he replied. "Had something on my mind." She handed him a cup and watched as he brushed the final strokes on the sign. "That's beautiful," she said softly. "A garden of new beginnings. It fits." Ethan looked at her, his eyes calm. It's what Maggie wanted, for everyone to have a place to start again. Claire nodded, her cheeks pink from the cold. She'd be proud. "You turned her dream into something living." He smiled faintly. "I just followed her light." They stood there in silence, watching the snow fall over the flowers sleeping beneath. It was peaceful. Then Claire said gently, "Ethan, have you ever thought about what your dream is? You've done so much for hers." He thought about it. "Maybe this is my dream," he said slowly. "Helping people find hope. Building something that lasts. It's not what I planned, but it feels right." Claire smiled. "That's the thing about life. It rarely goes as planned. But sometimes it still leads us where we belong." Her words stayed with him. That evening, Ethan finally did something he hadn't done in years. He set up his canvas. The brush felt unfamiliar at first, but as he painted, everything around him seemed to breathe again. The strokes flowed easily, colors blending into something alive. He painted the garden as it would look in spring, vibrant, full of people, laughter, and love. But this time, in one corner, he painted 2 figures, himself and Claire, standing under the blooming cherry tree. It wasn't about romance or longing. It was about connection, about 2 hearts that found warmth in the same light. Weeks passed, and winter slowly began to fade. By the time spring arrived, the garden burst back to life. Flowers returned brighter than ever, as if Maggie herself had whispered them awake. Ethan and Claire hosted another small gathering to celebrate the season. Families came, children played, and music filled the air. Ethan looked around and saw joy, pure, genuine joy. And for the first time in years, he felt complete. Later that day, as the sun dipped low, Ethan and Claire sat by the fountain. The golden light danced on the water, and the scent of lilac surrounded them. "You did it," Claire said softly. "You really brought it all back." "We did it," Ethan corrected. "You helped me remember what it means to live again." She looked at him with warmth. "I think Maggie knew you'd need someone to walk beside you when she was gone." He smiled. "Maybe she did. She was always one step ahead." They laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that comes from shared healing. Ethan took a deep breath and said, "Claire, I used to think life ended when loss came, but now I see it's just another beginning. You helped me see that." She looked at him, eyes glistening. "And you helped me believe that kindness can outlive grief." "That's rare, Ethan." The moment hung between them, quiet and meaningful. Then she leaned her head gently against his shoulder, and he didn't move away. The air felt lighter, the world softer. It wasn't about falling in love. It was about 2 people finding peace in each other's company. As the last light faded, Ethan whispered, "She'd love this, you know?" "The laughter, the flowers, the life," Claire smiled. "Then let's make sure it never fades." They sat there until the stars appeared, the garden glowing under the soft night sky. The fountain sparkled, and the wind carried the scent of roses. Ethan thought about how far he had come, from loneliness to purpose, from silence to song. Maggie's words returned to him once more. "Keep growing things. The world needs more life." He finally understood that life wasn't about holding on to people. It was about carrying their lessons forward. Maggie had been a teacher, a friend, and a light, but the greatest gift she gave him was the courage to open his heart again. Years later, the garden became a landmark in their town, a place where people came to heal, love, and start over. Children grew up calling it the Garden of Hope. Couples got engaged there. Artists painted beneath the trees, and every spring, Ethan and Claire would plant a new rose bush together. Each one a tribute not to loss, but to life itself. On one particularly warm afternoon, Ethan stood beside the greenhouse now covered with vines and flowers. Claire joined him, their hands brushing as they looked at what they had built. "We kept the promise," she said. He nodded. "And it was worth everything." The breeze rustled through the leaves, carrying the sound of laughter and distant music. Ethan looked toward the horizon, the sunlight reflecting in his eyes, and whispered, "Thank you, Maggie, for teaching me how to live again." As the garden shimmered in the light, it felt as though she was smiling somewhere among the blooms. And in that moment, Ethan realized the truth. Some people leave your life, but their love keeps you growing forever.